Greetings and welcome to the second event of our Forestry Speed Dating, focused on unlocking forest carbon markets with innovative solutions. I am Steve Briers from the European Forest Institute's Bioregions Facility, and it's an honor to guide today's discussions as your moderator. In this Forestry Speed Dating, we will focus on three innovative solutions in the forestry sector's carbon markets. Starting with Ecobase, this organization is reaching out to forest owners interested in exploring carbon initiatives. Meanwhile, CO2Offset presents carbon markets as a twofold opportunity, a way to enhance forest stewardship and a new way for revenue. The third innovation is CarbonStack.
So 2.5 years ago, I'm an ex-investment banker, but don't hold that against me. And then I finished my banking career and moved back to Estonia, where I'm from, and I started helping a good friend of mine, a landowner, mid-sized one, 3,500 hectares, to raise some capital. So we were talking with pension funds around the world, and who I knew from my previous life, and every single pension fund who wasn't based in Europe asked us, "But what about carbon credits? Why don't you have that as part of your future income streams?" And I had to embarrassingly answer, "Well, I don't know exactly what you're talking about. It's an interesting academic topic, but it's not a real thing, is it?" And they said, "Well, over here in Europe, in the States, over here in Canada, over here in New Zealand, it's a very normal course of business." So we basically thought, okay, this is interesting. Let's go and reach out to some experts who know more about this and ask if something like this can also be done in Europe, or at least know how to answer that question without feeling embarrassed. And then we reached out to a lot of people and we asked them two simple questions. Can European land-based carbon projects be developed, and why haven't they been, why they haven't been developed? Because 2.5 years ago, if anyone would have gone to any of the large voluntary carbon standard registries, Verra or Gold Standard, they would have not seen almost any European-based projects, at least not no European land-based projects. So we were wondering why that is. And many times the answers we got were, "I'm not sure if you can do one because no one has done one." But that's not good enough of a reason to not do something. So we just went ahead with it. And we had very kind of a humble idea in the beginning, which is that we wanted to do a small project for some of the Estonian landowners who we knew personally. But next thing you know, they thought that this would be interesting also for some of their friends in some other countries, and so on and so forth, until 2.5 years later, we are currently in 16 countries across Europe where lands have been sent to our project. It is actually, as weird as it is to say, it's the largest deforestation project in any voluntary registry right now in the world, with 162,131 hectares of land submitted to us. We have a very large project boundary. All of Europe is included in the same one Verra project. The reasoning for that is that we want to be open to have any country in Europe, also the smaller countries in Europe, who might not have scale enough to have a single project, even if it would be done across the whole country, to be able to do afforestation activities and to benefit from the carbon income that can be provided to them through that. So really from north to south, from east to west, everywhere in Europe, we are able to operate, and we have landowners, many very large landowners working with us across Europe. So the reason why we are needed in this market, and again, as a finance person, you kind of very quickly, it was the first thing that I found about this market, which is very strange. Most projects that are done across Europe, most projects that are done across the world, especially in the tropics, they're relatively large. And then the reason is the most important, that the reason why they are large is that the fixed costs to set up a carbon project in using the Verra or the Gold Standard system are very, very large. And those fixed costs don't really change when you go from 1,000 hectares to 10,000 hectares to 100,000 hectares to 1,000,000 hectares. So the logical way to go about this is to make a project that is as large as possible. In many ways, that has been the reason, I think, why there haven't been any European-based projects. Europe doesn't have 50,000 hectare cadastral units This whole thing is aggregating a bunch of 2 hectare, 3 hectare, 7 hectare, 10 hectare land plots together into a large grouped project, which brings along with it complexities around logistics, complexities around monitoring, just complexities around any paperwork really, and the massive amount of landowners. So we have taken that on, and this is really the only way to give the landowners carbon income without using most of that income as the to cover the cost that would come along with it. We're able to do all of this work and cover all the carbon related costs for the landowners for a 10% fee, which to our knowledge is the lowest fee in the world when it comes to international carbon projects. And we're only able to do that because we are by now so large. The further benefit to this is also that there is a massive mismatch between the size of carbon buyers and the average landowner. The average landowner will never have, at least in Europe, enough credits to offer so that any of the top 2,000 largest companies in the world, the main carbon buyers, that they would be interested in having a direct private discussion and a contract between them and that landowner. Basically, the carbon buyer wants to buy 100,000 credits a year. No single landowner, except for some of the largest ones, are able to produce the amount of credits that the carbon buyer needs. Again, aggregating them together gives us not only the possibility to provide credits at a lower price than any landowner could get normally, but also to sell the credits to the buyers who are willing to pay high prices and look at long-term deals, which they wouldn't be able to access on their own. So there's many downsides to doing a carbon project in Europe compared to the tropics: slower growth rates, very small cadastral units. But there is also one big benefit, which is that the landowners in Europe know what they're doing, or at least if you work with the ones who know what they're doing, as we are working, then they know what they're doing. So that's why our split of responsibility is pretty simple. The landowners take care of the forest, and we take care of the carbon side. So, many times we get asked about the monitoring and permanence and all those, very important topics in the carbon markets. And we have a very easy answer to all of that, which is that the forest law plus the type of landowners that we work with, they basically ensure most of, they take care of most of the problematic parts that one would see in a tropical afforestation project, which we do not have. So I'm going to skip this one. This is our team. I'm going to skip this one as well. I want to talk a little bit about the choice of registry and what's going on the regulatory side in Europe. So the choice of which carbon registry to use from the international ones, it was really quite simple. Verra is by far the largest. If people would now look at Verra registry, then basically every single European carbon project that is land-based, be it regenerative agriculture or afforestation or improved forest management, they have all used or are using Verra rather than gold standard. And those are really the only two options until last November, right? And what happened last November is, of course, that we have now the EU CRCF, the EU Carbon Removal Certification Framework, that is currently being set up. Very interesting votes or votings will be happening, next week and end of November. And this, overall for us, it's of course a great sign that the EU is seeing that these types of activities are able to support or can be done in Europe. What is maybe a little bit well, not worrying, but something that is definitely keeping or holding back some of the implementation activities from the landowner side is that there is currently no clear guidance on if I would do afforestation this autumn, I would join Ecobase's Verra project, will I be able to move that land over to the EU CRCF when the EU CRCF is ready, right? And that in a way creates this, well, let's maybe wait and do it a little bit later. So there's probably tens of thousands of hectares that could be unlocked and afforestation activities done on them if there would be a little bit more clearance on the EU CRCF side. But overall, it is definitely a great signal, not only to the carbon buyers, that if they forward purchase credits from our project right now, then they might be worth significantly more in the future due to the fact that the EU will provide a certain stamp of approval for the same activities, which hopefully will lead into higher credit prices, as well as they would be able to, I mean, not only carbon buyers, but also landowners then are able to benefit from it, as they might also need the credit generation or the EU CRCF, some of them for their own internal offsetting, or let's say net zero goals, right? Because not all the landowners are just landowners, but they have a number of activities across the value chain, creating a situation where they would really love to use their own lands, doing afforestation activities on their own lands or other carbon activities to achieve their net zero goals. So, but yeah, overall, there is a regulatory uncertainty that is holding these activities back, which we hope will be then solved in the near future. A little bit about the co-benefits as well. I mean, so far what I've discussed is really kind of from a landowner's perspective, what they are able to do, but the wider goal and the mission here is to really restore the native, the natural ecosystem that Europe used to have. Almost all of Europe used to be a forest. I'm not saying we should go back to that. Obviously, we have food security needs. Humans have had an impact, and you know, we will continue existing in Europe, of course, but just looking at some of these numbers, how much of a certain ecosystem has been destroyed, these are very shocking numbers. Our goal is to try to support as much as we can biodiverse natural ecosystem restoration, through which we are providing the landowners, on top of the credits, biomarkers, something that we have kind of come up with ourselves in a way based on eDNA work. The point really here is to try to separate out the landowners who are trying to go the extra mile to have the ability for them to sell their credits at a higher price, while being part of a large project that provides with it a lot of scale effects, right? So try to have the best of both worlds. And we hope that that would work out. And again, this is another regulatory related topic, which is that it is very hard historically to put different carbon projects into onto an exchange to create similarities between them, because a ton of CO2 is not a ton of CO2. It's a heterogeneous market, and even within one project you might have heterogeneous activities, right? Which basically means that we hope that the EU CRCF would also take these types of things into account. The way our carbon calculations work is really based on the Verra-approved methodologies, and you know, we, for example, in this mixed birch forest example here, we would use the long-term average across rotations to be able to calculate what is the maximum number of credits a landowner is able to earn. The credits are given to the landowner, which is very important, and not all of the carbon, let's say, schemes, especially national ones, follow that logic, but the credits should be given to landowner after the carbon has been captured. So yearly monitoring, yearly verifications, providing the credits after the carbon has been captured, as only then is it something that can be sold, can be purchased, and only after that have we actually created some climate good. Yeah, and then maybe I'll tell you a little bit about the carbon buyer aspect as well. Overall, carbon buyers are also, all of them, saying that the regulatory uncertainty in this market is there's a lot of it. Not only are, you know, GSG protocol coming up with new things, SBTi coming up with new things that they need to follow, but also when they are an EU-based company, then the EU CRCF and the sustainable finance frameworks, and I mean there are so many regulations, and there is due to the long list of these, this is again something that is keeping the carbon buyers from pulling the trigger and actually making the investments, but they'd rather take a wait and see approach, which is one of the biggest issues, I think, in this market. But there are some kind of faster moving, forward-looking carbon buyers who are giving us offers. The carbon credit prices nowadays, the offers we're getting are between 20-25 euros, more than 30 different carbon buyers, all of them large, wanting to buy five figures of carbon credits every year, are interested in working with us. And again, the benefit of having a European-based project is that these carbon buyers are able to look at their own operations and their own emissions in various European countries and match them against the carbon capture activities that we are doing.
As you mentioned, my name is Julian. I'm the founder and CEO of CarbonStack. We founded the company really with actually this image in mind. So this is one of our afforestation sites in Germany. Germany has been hit very hard over the last few years with climate-related damages, especially when you think about spruce monoculture, which has been basically erased from certain areas. And we do have over 500,000 hectares in Germany right now looking just like this. This is roughly like 5% of the forest, of the total forest area. So for us, when we started the company in 2021, for us, the question was always, how can we help landowners to get access to liquidity to actually do reforestation, especially if they have been hit as hard as some of the German forest owners? And how can we also make sure that we create climate resilient forests in the process? So we want to make sure that this is basically, I would say, like the last afforestation that we have to do due to climate related damages, and how can we make sure that this afforestation really creates a forest that is biodiverse and that can resist the drastic changes that we see right now in our ecosystems. And if you look at the big picture, you can see that, you know, we're very this problem really stretches across Europe. You have 15% of species that are critically endangered, nearly 60% of endemic species that are threatened. And so we have to make sure that the problem that we do see in certain locations at the moment doesn't spread across the entire forest in Europe. And we have to make sure that where we already see problems, that we can address them very precisely. That's the main point. And so for us, it's about two things. When we look at the voluntary carbon market and how companies can, or forest businesses can interact with it, for us, it's about access to liquidity, to how do you make sure that you actually have the money to do afforestation, reforestation projects. And on the second hand, for us, it's very important to make sure that we find the right trees for the right locations. So really creating biodiverse forests, climate resilient forests. And we are very deep into the science behind that and how can we give landowners the right tools to actually adapt the forest. That's for us the main vision. Let's start with the liquidity part. I wasn't sure how deep most of the audience is into carbon credits, so I thought I'd start with a very basic principle, and the question we get a lot actually from landowners, which is, can I actually develop a project of my own on my own land? And we always look at these three dimensions of additionality, which are very important. So on the one hand, for us, when we develop a carbon project, it's important to look at the financial additionality. So do you actually need the money from the carbon credits to do the afforestation or reforestation? That's the first thing we look at. So we want to make sure that you don't just do a clear cut, then get carbon credits and do the afforestation you would do anyway. But actually, we look at the most damaged areas across Europe. Then the environmental additionality is kind of a given one. So we want to make sure that we can capture more carbon long term than the business as usual scenario. And then we also look at the legal additionality. So what are you required to do anyway? Are you even able to fulfill those laws? Because maybe you don't have the capital to do that. And we usually do a quick analysis of that. And then what results are basically three different types of projects that you can do in Europe. One is reforestation of damaged areas, like the area I just showed you. So for instance, replacing, maybe you had spruce monoculture, it died, and now you want to make sure that you get the money to do a proper reforestation. Then we look at afforestation of new forest land. So for instance, of agricultural land, if that's not needed anymore. And the same question, basically, how can we get the money for that? And how can we ensure that we plant the right tree species? And then there is improved forest management, which exists and it's happening across Europe, but it's not our focus because usually the carbon uptake or the difference in carbon uptake is really small. And so it's not very financially attractive for most companies, most forest companies. Then you look at the process, basically it's split into three parts, and at the end you get basically carbon credits. So we always start with feasibility and project planning. So we look at the forest area, make sure that everything fits. Then we do the execution basically of the afforestation, reforestation, and the validation from the standard, and then long-term the verification. So over 30 years, for instance, you look at the forest maybe every 5 years, and you see what are the changes and how many carbon credits can be issued based on that. We work with several standards. I put Verra and the Verified Carbon Standard here as an example because it's the one we use most with multiple projects in Europe at the moment in the pipeline. And that is the basic process for all the landowners. And then it kind of depends of what you want. What we do most often is that we have some kind of investor, often a company that emits a lot of CO2 that is investing into the forest basically and financing the reforestation, afforestation at the second stage. And so the landowner gets the liquidity that they need, and in return they get, or the carbon emitter gets the carbon credits in the future. Obviously, there are different concepts. You can also split the carbon credits between you two, or if you can afford it, you can maybe do the reforestation by your own. But this is the concept that we do see most often, that the carbon emitter actually invests and that then gets the carbon credits over time. So now let's talk about how do we find the right tree for the right location, and how do we adapt trees and forests to climate change. And what happens is that we develop a platform. We've spent over 1.5 years on developing that. And our main goal is that forest owners are able to enter their forest areas into our online platform. And then what we can do is we can actually simulate those forest areas in different climate scenarios. So we look at different tree species in different locations, and we simulate how do those behave and how do they interact with each other in order to create a mixed forest. And this is a big step because a lot of forest owners work with yield curves at the moment, and they don't know how the picture of trees actually will develop in different climate scenarios because they only can act on experiences they have from the past. And we can optimize then for either carbon capture, maybe for yield, for different biodiversity factors and so on. And we can again plot that out in different climate scenarios and see how the forest will perform on that very location. And we can also calculate climate-related risks. So for instance, we can calculate how stressed will the forest be or the mixture of trees be in a certain scenario, and that maybe makes it more endangered or threatened by pests, for instance, because the trees can't defend themselves as well if they are stressed. And so you can calculate certain risk factors based on that, which is very helpful for a lot of landowners. And then specific for carbon credits and for verified carbon standard, we can actually benchmark different control areas against project areas. So we look at what is the project area. We determine what are potential control areas. So usually with the new methodology, actually, you look long-term, or you compare long-term the project area with real forest sites around it. And then the difference between those two is basically the carbon credits you get. And we can, again, look in different climate scenarios and benchmark those against each other. So how do we do it? Actually, not with yield curves, as I mentioned. So because yield curves lack the ability to actually show differences in different climate scenarios. And just to give you a very brief summary of what we do, when you usually look at yield curves and tables like that, you look at past measurements. So you look in the past, you look into the last 50 years, maybe 100 years, and you look at how do certain tree species perform in a certain location, and then you just project that into the future. And the problem is now with climate change, the climate zones are changing so quickly that this is not accurate anymore. And so if you plant a forest today, you maybe need 20 years to actually discover that you have made a mistake. And that is very costly, both in terms of reforestation costs, but also cost of opportunity. And that's what we want to avoid. And what we did was we developed a process-based model where we actually simulate all the biological and physiological processes in a forest and in a tree. So we can simulate the photosynthesis process, for instance. We can tell you how does maybe a rising CO2 level in the atmosphere actually affect your trees. Maybe it's even better for them because they have access to more CO2. But then we also look at the location, the climate on a certain location, and we can say, okay, but maybe it doesn't get enough water from the atmosphere, maybe it doesn't get enough nutrients and so on. And so that's what we can calculate, and we can actually compare the tree species, and we can also simulate the interaction with each other. So the competition for different things they need, for instance, light or water and so on. And we can do that long term and in different scenarios. And how does it work? Well, we collect a lot of weather data. Germany alone has 1,000 weather stations, and we look at the European scale at the moment. And so we can tell you very locally, how does your climate look like? What has been the weather in the past? What is it right now? And then we can make assumptions about the future. We also look at the soil. We can look at it like an onion, so at the different layers. We look at up to 10 different soil layers with a database with 1,600 different soil types for Europe. And we look at that, and then we basically determine how does your forest interact with the soil, with the atmosphere. And then what happens is that we calculate actually the tree over the entire period of the year. So from the first leaves until the tree loses its leaves, we can basically tell you, okay, how does the tree grow? How much diameter does it gain? How much height does it gain? And so on. And based on that, you can also obviously calculate carbon uptake. So we do have two different types of offerings. One is the project development. We do, as mentioned, carbon projects, the entire process. We also consult companies who might be thinking about that. If the debate at the moment is the debate about contribution claims and carbon credits and double counting in Europe. We have consulted also state-owned forestries who had those issues. And so if you have anything in that term, we're very happy to work with you. And the second part is the forest analytics platform, which is independent from the project development process. So you can, or we can do, both combined, but it is also independent from each other. So you can also have a different project developer and then use our platform to analyze your forest. And what we're looking for right now are actually pilot customers for the forest analytics platform. We operate right now in Germany and Ireland, and we look for more pilot customers across Europe. We are especially looking for companies in Northern Europe, in Scandinavia, for instance, maybe the UK. And we really want to test out our technology and make sure that we can benefit a lot of forest owners across Europe. Yeah, thank you very much.
I start my professional life working as a researcher at the National Physical Laboratory in London, where I learned how to measure things with high precision and high accuracy. And from there, I went to the vastness of space, so I was part of the team that was doing the OXG, the on-ground system equipment that allow the calibration of the Sentinel-5. And the Sentinel-5 will be sent to space by the end of this year. And that's where I had the contact with the Copernicus program. As most of us, you will know, the Copernicus program started in '98 by the European Union with two goals. In a ever-growing population, how we keep everyone safe and how we keep everyone fed. So the solution was to send a family of satellites to gather information that we could analyze and make informed decision based on that to answer those questions. So that was my professional life. And in 2017, I actually had a large accident in a highway. And so I decided to take a year gap. Also in 2017, that's when the large wildfires happened in Portugal, killing more than 100%. So this was quite impactful for me because my hometown was surrounded in both sides with those wildfires, and okay, so that's when I decided how I could use my legacy in measurements and knowledge of space industry to try to be a small piece of puzzle and to provide some information in the forest to avoid those type of devastating wildfires. That inspiration led me to work with large forest companies in Portugal. Yet what we could see, it's every summer we still suffer from large wildfires and the challenge persisted. So that's working with these large companies also allow me to understand the potential impact of small-scale forest management to avoid these wildfires and taking care of the forest. The stewards of our forests don't just prevent wildfires, they also uphold our planet's natural balance. And this is really important for what we're trying to do here. But how we incentivize those small owners to take care of their forests? It's really hard, especially in Portugal and most of the countries, to manage to have financially incentivize to take care of the forest. And that's where the CO2 offset step in. Our mission is to financially support those who guard our forests, rewarding them for their dual services, shielding us from fires and preserving our natural habitat vital to our existence. So at this moment, we reach a boiling point as humanity, both literally and metaphorically. We see every year our world heats up a bit more and shattering every year records of temperature. But besides that temperature, there's another temperature rising. It's the voice of the community and humanity. We have enough of empty promises, right? And we want clear actions. Whoops, so that's not what. Okay. So we want real action, and if we look around, the European Union is stepping in with the new ESG reports, or as Jan was showing, the new carbon credit framework is also starting to work. The European Bank, the central bank, this European Central Bank starting to invest in greener projects, and also the new legislation, European legislations, is expecting for false claims to cost between 4 to 10% of their turnovers. So definitely reaching a tipping point and a boiling point. And at CO2 offset, our direction is quite clear. It's we need to find real actions, quantify those real actions, and those actions that really happen in the forests should be financially rewarded. But all the processes need to be also really clean, really transparent, and unmutable. So genuine actions needed to be quantified and found. So these principles. That's exactly what we're trying to do here. It's to find and focus in tangible, real human activities that are critical to preserve the ecosystem of the forest and to increase the health of the forest. And that's what we're trying to do here. How we do it is we have our own methodology. We develop our own methodology that incorporate the ton-year accounting, and the reason that is that we have the conviction that 1 ton-year removed in 2023 has a higher impact for humanity than any ton-year removed in 5 or 7 years, and so on. So in 2024 will be more important and will have a higher impact than 2028. And so that's why we adapt not project-based but ton-year approach in our methodology. We quantify real actions, but also a different approach that we have from Vera projects and gold standards is that we use a risk assessment filter. What does that mean? That as Julian was saying, it's very important for us, the financial additionality, meaning that only actions that occur in the forest that needs that additional finance funding to keep the forest healthy should be compensated. And that's why we create this risk assessment filter that allow us to keep an eye constantly in the forest, identify potential areas that can suffer from different type of health issues, and we then send a notification to the landowner to take an action on it, and that's what we can quantify as a real action. Since we are based in real actions that happen in the past, we can guarantee that we eliminate greenwash. And that's also really important for us and potential clients. All this process is then inserted in a public auditable record that is immutable, and anyone can see what's the reason behind a single credit being produced. What's the methodology, when it was produced, what was the type of action that produced that carbon credit, and this is open to anyone in the world to see it. That I want to leave here a point that we are creating a smart contract in this public auditable record that is going to be open source, and anyone and this can help with the double accounting. Anyone that have a project can use our smart contract and to register in this type of public auditable record. Okay, so I'll leave this here also. I want to show a little bit what we do. What's our digital twin? I'll leave here a video. So this is a real case that we're working on. It's a forest that we've been working. Here is our digital twin. Is 1 hectare of data. We start with the LiDAR, and from the LiDAR we separate every single tree from one another. But not only the tree, we separate also the branch, the leaves, and we reconstruct a digital twin that allow us to scale our solution. Since we use those data as a ground zero and a data set to be used then to correlate with the satellite data. This allows us to quantify really precisely and really accurately very different dimensions of the forest, from the tree height, the volume of the tree, but also the volume of the branches. But most importantly is that we can simulate any actions that occur in the forest. We can take single trees from here and see how the forest will behave in the certain time wise, and in a few days and few years. I'm going to accelerate, not so. Sorry, I just want to put a little bit back. So this is our virtual tree, and as you can see, we reconstruct with high precision every single branch, every single tree, and this allows us exactly to quantify the biomass individually in branches, in trees, and even bark, which is pretty cool. And with that, we determine the biomass of individual trees. But sorry, that's not what I want. So our model is quite simple. So we have this filter, okay, that we create basically a SaaS AI-driven powered by AI, that a landowner can register their forest. We keep an eye in the forest constantly, every 15 days, and we identify if there's a need of intervention on that land. If there's a need of intervention, we notify the landowner, okay, there's a need for you to intervene in your forest. When the intervention happens, we detect it, and what we do is that we pay for the actions, so we cover the cost of the action, and we give a 10% more from that action of the cost, giving a 10% benefit to additional value to the forest owner. We convert that action, thanks to our digital twin, in a CO2 ton equivalent, and then into a ton year equivalent. And that's how we can then sell those carbon credits to companies, and part of the investment is reinvest in the landowners. At this moment, we identify 4 actions that create additionality. So it's the harvest postpone, the underwood cleaning. So basically to avoid wildfires, especially in countries like Portugal, Spain, Greece, but we understand that many other countries starting to suffer from these wildfires. Forest thinning, which is quite a necessary forest management that don't always happen to improve the health of the forest, since it's quite quite expensive, but also burn area recovery. At the moment, we are starting to develop a project of around 100,000 hectares of forest wildfires area. And the advantage using our system is the funding is really fast, since we are not related with government. Here in Portugal, there's a lot of funds. There's some money for recover the forest after the area being burned. The problem with that is that it takes a long time for the funding to come through. And with our technology and what we're developing, we can assure or avoid erosion in the soil, avoiding that the layer with grains will just wash away, and that's really important for us, and that's how we create also additionality through the burn area recovery. Finally, our system also using the FSC certified standards, we make a traceability matrix of the wood that is taken out from the forest through the forest thinning, but also the burn area recovery, or even the wood cleaning. And so at this moment we have three products. The first one starting at €10, and is the CO2 sustain. Basically, it's only postpone areas and cleaning areas. We're going after that with a CO2 removal. That is a blend of four actions. Sorry, is the harvest, postpone, the underwood cleaning, and the forest thinning, and the tracking of the wood. And finally, our more expensive, but also the one with more impact in terms of social reporting and environmental reporting, is the CO2 recover, which besides being the same as a CO2 removal, include also a burnt area recovery. At the moment, that's our web. We are a little bit everywhere in Portugal. We're starting to now thinking to move to other countries in Europe, and that's what we're looking opportunities to make to try our technology and to develop our technology with other countries. This is our SaaS for the buyer side. When a buyer buy a carbon credit or make a transaction, those transaction will also include the location of each project, but what's also the actions that provoke it, and the emission of the carbon credit. Since we are an API, all the data is available for any company that buy carbon credits to work the data with their own image and own PR expectation. This is also part of our SaaS. We also have an automate carbon offset ESG report that can be included directly in the ESG report for a company, that is automatically from our SaaS. But more important is that we have tangible actions and their location and why they happen. There's this here, the Iberian lens is zero, so because we're working with 5,000 hectares of forest that is preserving the lens, and we already have some actions happening there that helping the preservation of these species. So our process is quite straightforward. You just can buy a few credits straight from our SaaS, and that will pay the actions from forest owners. And thank you.